What are the Pirates' strengths and weaknesses heading into 2024, and how will they affect the team?
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. I had to clear my throat there for a second, but guys, welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith. You can follow me on Twitter or on anything at Locked On Pirates or at MVP_Ethan. For all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And as we know, it's March 13th, and it appears that things are continuing to move forward in spring training with cuts happening daily now. It appears that we're starting to get a better look at what this roster is going to look like going into March 28th against the Miami Marlins, which opens the door to talking about strengths and weaknesses of this Pittsburgh Pirates roster. And I think it's interesting to always have this conversation because a lot of times you don't really know what the strengths and the weaknesses of your team is going to be going into any MLB season, but you can usually paint a pretty good picture just based off of roster construction and a bunch of other things. And when you head into each new year, I mean, one can usually determine a team's strengths and weaknesses, and that's what I'm going to try to do today. Now, obviously, sometimes these things change, and that's really just because baseball is a very fun sport that rarely goes how you expect it to. Just like we all expected a Rangers Diamondbacks World Series last year when the year started, right? So we don't really know ultimately what the strengths and weaknesses of these teams will be, including the Pittsburgh Pirates. You have to factor a lot of these things in. You factor in injuries. You factor in a guy playing better than we thought he might or worse than we thought he might. And these are all things that you have to worry about going into the year. But for example, let's head back to 2023, and it was pretty clear that the Pirates lacked in multiple areas, really back in bullpen help, the starting rotation, first baseman depth, etc. And as the season drew on, the bullpen got better and the first baseman depth did not. But that's really baseball for you. I mean, you look at those things as clear weaknesses. Some of them got better as the season progressed. Some of them didn't. And that's something that you could see what the strengths and the weaknesses that we talk about today. And as the season drew on, I mean, again, every season as it draws on, strengths and weaknesses could be something you deal with for a month. It could be something you deal with for an entire year. It could be something you deal with for a couple days. But the Pirates' strengths and weaknesses can begin to take shape now with opening day just about 2 weeks away. And I don't think we're going to expect much to change as far as roster construction is concerned. I don't think we're going to really have to worry about that all that much. And yes, cuts are still in order. We've seen them happen. We'll talk about those in spring news and notes later. But most of the MLB relevant cuts, I think, revolve around position battles that will wrap up in spring, particularly second base and right field. So it's hard to know where those stand completely, but you can also guess where those things stand right now for the Pittsburgh Pirates as far as a strength or weakness is concerned. But when looking at the overall structure, I think you can find strengths and weaknesses pretty easily with this team. And we'll start with the strengths. It's always better to start with the positives of your baseball team rather than the negatives. And for starters, I think when you're looking at the strengths of this baseball team, you have to consider the amount of youth and potential upside that this team has on the roster. You look at Henry Davis, former number 1 overall pick, got the debut last year, will get the full-time catch this year and play his natural position rather than playing right field. Will also get the opportunity to play a full campaign for the first time at the MLB level. So it's very fun to see what he'll do. You look at Liover Peguero, who showed us a lot last season. Liover Peguero was a guy that a lot of people were pretty high on, but nobody really expected that he was going to have the power element that he kind of showed last year, and that he was just going to make good contact with the baseball overall. You could even include Jack Sawinski in this. I mean, he's still a younger player, hit 26 bombs last year. You would like, as I've said on the show before, to see him kind of not have those long stints of futility where he's striking out at a massive clip or not really hitting the baseball at all. And you would even throw O'Neal Cruz in this conversation as a guy that a lot of us are hoping takes that next step in 2024 and also plays his first full campaign. And all those names that I mentioned, they're all going to have massive roles on this roster in 2024. And you really expect each to take that next step forward into becoming a full-time Major League Baseball player, and not only a full-time Major League Baseball player, but a very good one at that. And that doesn't include a guy like Jared Triolo, who I think could be a utility man on this roster and really make an impact in multiple positions while also making an impact at the plate like he did last year. And then you also look at some guys that are going to be coming down the line. You look at Paul Skeens, you look at Jared Jones, you look at Braxton Ashcraft, even a Hunter Stratton can be thrown into that conversation as well if you want to throw him in there. So you may not feel the same way that you felt last year with the youth movement that we saw last year when we saw Andy Rodriguez, Henry Davis, Peguero, Gonzalez, Palacios even. We saw all these guys come into the fold. But the real players that we are talking about on this show all the time, like a Jared Jones, like a Paul Skeens, like a Braxton Ashcraft, even a Carmen Majinski, who's already here but can make a real impact. These are guys that are going to come in and really make a fun team. I mean, I think this team has the ability to be fun because they have the strength of having a lot of upside all over the place. And it makes for a fun dynamic too, because I think you're looking at a team again, much like last year, that gets better as the season continues. Now, another strength is the power upside on this roster, which I spoke about on the show last week about a potential power surge in Pittsburgh. And you look at last year and they already had 2 20-plus home run guys in Brian Reynolds and Jack Sawinski. But you look at O'Neal Cruz returning, who already has 19 on his career. You look at Hayes, Ke'Bryan Hayes and his bat having more upside than it ever has. You look at the additions of Rowdy Tellez and Edward Olivares and potential steps forward from Peguero and Davis. And you could be looking, folks, at a lineup 1 through 9 that just has power up and down the lineup. I mean, I even jokingly thought about the idea that Connor Joe could be a number 9 hitter in this lineup and be a great setup guy for the top of the order. And he hit double-digit home runs last year. So I do think that the home run total and the power on this team will improve considerably just based off of the roster construction. And I'm not saying that the Pirates will lead the majors in home runs like they have in spring, but you could see a considerable step forward in that department because the pieces are there. I mean, you look at Edward Olivares, who hit 12 last year, but was expected to hit 17. Rowdy Tellez has hit 30 plus in his career before. Jack Sawinski and Reynolds always have 30 plus home run potential. You look at O'Neal Cruz having 20 plus home run potential. Even Hayes could be put in that conversation. Henry Davis could hit 10 to 15. Leover Peguero could hit 10 to 15. I'm sure Jared Triolo and Connor Joe and those guys could even hit 10. Palacios hit double digits last year. So I think this is a team that you're looking at that really has power as something they can look at as a strength and a positive. And another strength of this team that I've already spoken about on the show before really has to be the bullpen that the Pirates have constructed on paper. I mean, this is a group, folks, that just looks nasty. You expect a back three of Colin Holderman, Aroldis Chapman, and David Bednar. And you're looking at that back three, and it has the potential to be a lethal trio. And then you not only have that three as your back end, or all the way on the end, but you also have Ryan Borucki, Carmen Majinski, Jose Hernandez, Dauri Moreta, if he's healthy, of course. And then you have potential contributors like Braxton Ashcraft, Hunter Stratton, and the NRIs that just make for a deep, deep unit on paper if it can stay healthy. And you could even argue that it was a strong unit last year, especially towards the end of the year. And with the addition of Chapman and some young guys inching closer, folks, this bullpen has top 10 in baseball potential. It just does. It's a group that could be a top 10 unit in terms of ERA, in terms of strikeouts, in terms of whip, in terms of saves, in terms of holds. Every major thing that you look at when you look at a bullpen, I think the Pirates have the potential to be top 10 in all of those categories from their bullpen this year. And when we move to weaknesses, I think it's pretty clear where the weaknesses are. I mean, we all know it points directly at the starting rotation that this team has. Yes, you added Martin Perez and Marco Gonzalez. But even those guys really have their question marks entering 2024 behind Mitch Keller. I mean, you look at Perez, kind of got buried in that rotation in Texas last year, didn't have the same kind of campaign that he had in 2022. Can he regain some of that? You look at Marco Gonzalez, a guy that had a lot of massive injury issues last year that could linger into this year. Can he stay healthy and get back to his consistent form? And then you look at behind those two guys, and all you have really is more questions. Do any of Luis Ortiz, Roansy Contreras, or Quinn Priester bounce back? Does Jared Jones' stuff translate to the big league level? Can Eric Lauer be a real back-end piece? Can any of those NRIs really end up being a real back-end piece? What happens with Bailey Falter? When could Paul Skeens debut, and does his stuff translate to the big league level right away? Those are all questions that you have about this rotation, and having that many questions in a rotation is never really a good thing. Now, obviously, every team in Major League Baseball usually has a plethora of questions that they have to answer about their rotation, but the good thing here is those guys have a chance to prove us all wrong. And you look at another weakness that this team has. I mean, it has to be the defense at first base. I mean, Rowdy Tellez, nobody's going to kid you and say he's a plus defender at first base. Jared Triolo can obviously help in that department, but I don't think he's always going to play first base. Connor Joe could even help in that department as well if you need to, but you also want to keep that DH spot open for the likes of Andrew McCutchen, Henry Davis, and others. And we got spoiled with Carlos Santana last year, and I wanted him back very badly for this reason, because I thought his bat was still very adequate enough to play. And really, at the end of the day, I just wanted Carlos Santana back. But I would expect a downtick in defense over at first base with Rowdy Tellez kind of manning that position. We'll see how it goes throughout the year. You also consider the position battles, and if no one truly steps away from that group at second base and right field, I think you have to consider those weaknesses just to say, what if Leo Piguero doesn't take the step forward that we expect? What if Palacios, Olivares, and Joe don't perform up to standard in right field? That'll be something to watch as well. And you can probably gather, though, that I believe, and I'm saying this very confidently, that this rendition of the Pirates has more strengths than they do weaknesses. But even those strengths are hopeful on upside, really just upside alone. Really what this team will be all about is, how does this upside look on this team? Do these guys kind of teeter closer to the upside that we keep talking about? Do they take that next considerable step forward? Do they end up tapping into their unlimited potential that some of these guys have? Those are all questions you have. And I think, sadly, the biggest weakness being the rotation could make or break this team. But I also think the Pirates, with their strengths, are going to have a very fun offense this year and a very fun bullpen. So all these things are going to come to fruition throughout the season. We're going to be covering them throughout the season, but we're also going to dive deeper into this on our 3-part prediction show that will be from Monday, March 25th to Wednesday, March 27th. Obviously, days before opening day, so not much will really be able to hinder what we're talking about on those shows. Obviously, on Monday, we'll have Gary Morgan, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll be doing my predictions as well as the predictions I have, not only for the Pirates, but for Major League Baseball as a whole. We're going to wrap up the short series of Know Your Enemy with the St. Louis Cardinals today. But before we do that, folks, let's talk about Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100 when you use code LOCKEDONMLB, because Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, and it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Folks, March Madness is here. You could bet on men's and college women's basketball and be part of the action at Prize Picks. And Prize Picks even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays alive. If you think Caitlin Clark can score more than 30 points and LeBron James can have more than 7 assists, well, just go bet on it at Prize Picks and download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Then pick more, pick less. It's that easy over at Prize Picks. And folks, also don't forget that, as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Well, for baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app. And welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. And on today's second segment and on today's show, we'll, of course, through the rest of the show, be doing the Cardinals Know Your Enemy and, of course, Spring News and Notes. And the Know Your Enemy short series concludes today, as we've already spoken about the Milwaukee Brewers, the Chicago Cubs, and the Cincinnati Reds on the past three shows. And today we wrap up with St. Louis, a team that really you look to bounce back from a horrid 2023 campaign. The Cardinals were just not a good team last year. They did not have anything really to look back on and say it was a good year. They went 71-91 last year, finishing last in the NL Central, something not very familiar to St. Louis Cardinals fans. And this was due in large part to their below average rotation. I mean, that rotation that the Cardinals had was just not a very good unit. And it was a unit they aimed to do everything really to fix this offseason. That was headlined, of course, by signing Sonny Gray, who is currently dealing with a strained hamstring injury. But Gray was the prize of course, the Cardinals offseason and is expected to headline the rotation when healthy. It just really matters how much that strained hamstring really lingers for Sonny Gray. They also went out and added two veteran arms in Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn via free agency. So the Cardinals did their due diligence to at least try and fix the rotation, at least in the short term. But there's still a lot of questions about this rotation in St. Louis. I mean, Miles Michaelis, Steven Matz, and Zach Thompson all returned from last year. You obviously expect Zach Thompson to have a larger role after 6 starts in 2023. The bullpen still headlined by Ryan Helsley, while they also made 4 other additions to the bullpen in Andrew Kittredge, Kenyon Middleton, Riley O'Brien, and Ryan Fernandez to kind of revamp that group as well. And really the pitching, I think, is going to be the biggest question mark for the Cardinals is, does the pitching elevate them back? Now, their lineup, which was still pretty decent last year despite the down season, will still, of course, be headlined by Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, while to me, youngster Nolan Gorman should be fully involved in the top end of that lineup. Other youngsters, Alec Burleson, Jordan Walker, Dylan Carlson, and Mason Wynn should join the lineup. Mason Wynn, of course, being their number 1 overall prospect and looking to have a big year this year. He'll be a big part of that, while you also look at veterans Matt Carpenter and Brandon Crawford, who are expected to supplement when they need to. Other big pieces on this team that are dealing with injuries right now are Lars Nootbaar and Tommy Edman. Those guys are dealing with injuries, so we'll see what impacts they have when they get healthy and how long it takes for them to get healthy for the St. Louis Cardinals. But what's very interesting about this Cardinals team is it does feel that a lot of their moves were definitely short-term moves. They were moves that were made to kind of supplement this team and get closer to a win-now mode, even though it doesn't feel that way. And when you see that the Cardinals are also the only team in the NL Central not to have a top 10 preseason farm system via MLB Pipeline, you get kind of worried if you're a Cardinals fan, because you're not only thinking about having such an old roster and such an aging roster, but you're also not really looking forward to a ton of top-end talent to come in and help things. But they do still have some talent in the minors that could offer help. I mean, I already mentioned Mason Wynn. I think that kid's going to be very good. I think he's going to be a phenomenal player for that team. But then you look at Tink Hensey and Tekoa Roby, who are both right-handers who should have a real shot to break the rotation this year. You could also see outfielder Victor Scott II and infielder Thomas Agazy debut, with all five, those being their top five prospects, all five of their prospects in the Cardinal system having ETAs of 2024. So you're going to see a lot of these guys start to come up. And I also wouldn't be surprised if other right-handers like Gordon Graceffo and Sam Roberse make their debuts this year, offering pitching help in the rotation that will desperately need it. And there's other guys in that system too that can come in and pitch right away that I think could really make an impact in that rotation, but nobody top end like what we've seen, what the Pirates have, or like the Reds have, or like some of these other teams that have top end pitching talent. And for the Cardinals, it's all going to be about bouncing back from 2023. That's all this is going to be about. That's all they really have to be concerned about, is bouncing back from 2023. But the biggest question is, did they do enough to do so? I mean, yeah, you added Sonny Gray, Kyle Gibson, and Lance Lynn. Does that fix all of your rotation problems? I don't really know if I'm a Cardinals fan. And you also still have questions in that lineup as well, especially, and you have to keep in mind that injuries happen. You hope that this team, with their higher average age, does stay healthy for the St. Louis Cardinals. But, I mean, it's something where it's hard to say, do you ever doubt the Cardinals? And I don't really. And the Pirates took advantage last year of the down year from St. Louis. They went 9-4 against the Cardinals, had their first winning record against the Cardinals since 2013, and their most wins against the Cardinals since 2016. And even with the additions the Cardinals made, I mean, you have to wonder how much they changed things. And I don't think they really changed all that much. But it's also hard from the Pirates fan perspective, and I'm even sure that Cubs fans, Brewers fans, and Cincinnati fans would say the same thing. I don't ever doubt the Cardinals as a contender in the division. I just don't. I mean, I know last year it even took me a while to say, wow, this Cardinals team is actually this bad. And it's just something that I don't think is going to be a staple for the Cardinals for very long. Now, starting pitching, I think, for that team is going to make or break the Cardinals. And that's a common theme that we've seen among pretty much every NL Central team at this point. I mean, every NL Central team has questions in their rotation that could make or break their season. You look at the Cubs. Yeah, you have Justin Steele. What else do you have? You look at the Brewers. Yeah, you have Freddie Peralta. Brandon Woodruff is out this year. What else do you have? For the Pirates, you have Mitch Keller. What else do we have? And then for the Cardinals, it's really with Sonny Gray. I mean, he's not healthy right now, but if he is healthy, you have Sonny Gray. But how much can you really trust Kyle Gibson, Miles Michaelis, and Lance Lynn? And does Thompson take that next step? There's a lot of questions around the NL Central, specifically about pitching, seeing as the best pitcher in the division is no longer here. So the Pirates, by the way, will not face off with St. Louis until June this year. So both teams, I think, should have a pretty good idea of where they stand before they even play each other. And that wraps up the outlook of the NL Central as part of Know Your Enemy, with my full NL Central predictions for the division coming out as part of the 3-part prediction show, March 25th through March 27th. So remember those days. I will obviously be tweeting those out as well. And also, don't forget that we have a mailbag episode coming to you this Friday. That's something that I want to try to do all the time here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But before we do wrap up today's show, the final segment is always going to be spring news and notes. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But before we do, we're going to talk about Game Time. Folks, Game Time is your place to get all of your last-minute tickets to your next big event, because you shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And with zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the GameTime app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off, and download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And folks, again, don't forget March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Locked On MLB's preview show will be dropping on Locked On Sports Today, so that'll be a very fun time as well. And to all my everydayers, thank you for always tuning in to this final segment of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You guys are the best fans of a podcast that a podcast host could ask for. I thank you guys every day for listening to this show, and I cannot wait for the regular season to get here. But right now it's spring news and notes, and it's March 13th, meaning we're just 2 weeks and a day away from opening day. Thank God. Guess who else just got off of work that day too? Me. So we will be covering that in length all day. Probably going to have multiple episodes on opening day. We're going to have one, of course, previewing the matchup, one post-game, and then maybe even one after that. But tomorrow, which we already highlighted on the show and will highlight again on the show tomorrow, we see the Pirates and Orioles do battle in the spring breakout game, which features, of course, both teams' top prospects. Some players in the game have already been sent back to minor league camp, especially for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But as I said before, it's going to be a fabulous event that will highlight the Pirates' top prospects and potential future stars, as well as the Orioles, as well as the 28 other teams. I just think it's a no-brainer for Major League Baseball that they did that. As for yesterday's action, the Pirates defeated the Braves 5-1 in spring training. They're currently playing right now, and from what I'm seeing on the Twitter notifications while I'm recording, it doesn't look like Rowanzi is having a great day. But as for yesterday, Oneil Cruz hit his fourth home run of spring and brought his spring OPS up to 1.340. Seeing Cruz healthy and hitting the baseball hard, it's just awesome. I mean, after his injury last year, really, I think everybody in baseball just wants to watch this kid play. And I think a potential breakout campaign could await the Pirates' young star. And I'm very excited to see what Oneil Cruz has to offer in 2024. Jack Sawinski and Billy McKinney added homers as well on the day yesterday. Jared Triolo continued his hot spring. He had another hit yesterday. He added a walk in there, while Nick Gonzalez and Rowdy Tellez also added hits on the day. Pitching was definitely interesting with the guys that were on the mound. Chase Anderson got the start and threw 3 innings of shutout baseball. That's something you like to see from any non-roster invitee. Colin Holderman allowed the only run of the day from Pirates pitching. He struck out 1 and walked 1 in his lone inning of work, so kind of a lot of ones on the scorecard for Colin Holderman. Josh Fleming, by the way, another NRI, threw 2 shutout innings, while Ryan Borucki, Kyle Nicholas, and Willie Peralta threw 3 shutout innings of baseball while allowing just 1 hit combined. So always good things to see from the starting pitch or from the pitching side of things, to see good days like this for the Pirates, even if it is spring. And as for the news side, I mean, the Eric Lauer acquisition was made official. The Pirates sent more players to minor league camp and optioned some players. Caden Smith-Njigba and Colin Selby were optioned to AAA Indianapolis. Sung Shae Shang was optioned to AA Altoona. Termar Johnson and Jack Brannigan, of course, who had solid spring outings, were optioned to minor league camp as part of yesterday's move. And we also got some medical updates this morning on Wednesday. Yasmani Grandal has been hitting and catching, but isn't allowed to run due to injury. Dario Moreta, who was a major piece in the bullpen last year, is being evaluated next week in a meeting. David Bednar is also expected to be throwing from the mound soon. He's throwing 120 feet right now as he continues to nurse his lat injury. And as for tomorrow's spring breakout game, even Thomas Harrington was scratched due to an injury, so we won't see him in Thursday's game that is flashing all the young prospects in the Pirates system. But that's all for the news and notes that I could find, folks. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. As usual, you can follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. As always, like, subscribe, and comment here on YouTube. I have a mailbag show this Friday, so make sure you get your questions in on Twitter or on YouTube comments. But that's all, folks. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, March 13th, and I'll see you tomorrow. But until then, see you on the flip side.